All right. Um, all right, class. Let's begin our chapter on cost of capital. All right. Cost of capital. Can you guess which chapter is this? Coming under which core topics? Investment financing, dividend decision. Which one do you think this chapter falls under? It is financing, right? Cost of capital is basically cost of financing. You have equity, you have debt, you have preference shares, and all those financing, all those funding will it's not provided for free. All right, there's always a cost for each of the funding. So we are here to compute the ways to calculate the cost of funding. So cost of capital is basically the cost of funding, and the cost of capital basically includes all the different costs in the company. You have cost of equity, cost of debt, cost of preference shares, all of it combined together, prorated based on the percentage of each of the funding, then we get a cost of capital. So the cost of capital is the overall cost of funding or cost of financing for a company. Right? So the learning goals will be understand the basic concept and sources of capital associated with the cost of capital. All right. The sources I mentioned: the equity, debt, and preference shares. So we're going to determine the long-term cost of debt, and what about this after tax cost of debt? It's all about. Then how we're going to calculate cost of preference shares, and also cost of equity. Okay. And the last one is what we call as WACC, weighted average cost of capital. That is how that is the formula will be used in order to calculate the cost of capital. Alright, so let's look at the overview of cost of capital. It represents the firm's cost of financing and is the minimum rate of return that a project must earn to increase the firm value. Alright, so this is crucial in understanding whether a project is viable or not, because we need to make sure the return from the project is higher than the cost that incur to do the project. Okay, so let's say we need 1 million to start the project. All right, and the 1 million, what is the source? Where do you get the funding from? Let's say you took a loan. All right, you took 1 million loan in order to finance the project. And what is the cost of financing the project? The cost of financing the project would be the cost of debt. All right, the loan for 1 million, let's say you are paying 10% interest per annum. All right, 10% interest per annum. So that is the cost of debt. All right, because you're funding the entire project with debt, with loan. Therefore, your cost of debt is the interest rate, 10%. So what is the cost for the project? Since you're funding the project entirely from by taking loan, so your cost of debt is equals to your cost of capital. Alright, so now you know your cost of project is 10%. So class clear? You are taking loan and you're paying 10% interest, so that becomes your cost debt. Okay, and for the project you're funding entirely from the debt, therefore your cost of debt equals to your cost of capital, means for the overall project. Okay, so now you know your cost is 10%. So how are we going to decide whether we're going to accept the project or not? Right, therefore it depends on the return you're going to gain from the project. If your projects could earn 11% return, right, If it could earn 11% return, then that means you could accept the project. Why? Your cost is 10%, your gain is 11%, therefore you have a profit 11, profit of 1%, therefore you can accept. Right? What if your gain is 8%? What if in another scenario you found out that the project you get only 8% return? Would you still accept the project? Answer is no, because your cost itself is 10%, right? And your gain is only 8%. You can't even cover your costs, therefore you reject the project. Alright, so that is how important to know the cost of capital or cost of funding for a project or for a company, right? Then the return will let you know whether you're making profit or making loss. So even before you begin the project, once you have this kind of estimation, then you already if you already forecast that the project is going to make loss, then you can forego the project. Alright? But if you forecast the project is going to be worthwhile because your gain is much more than your cost, then you can go ahead and do the project. Okay? So minimum rate of return the project was earned to increase the value, right? So financial managers are ethically bound to only invest in projects that expect to exceed cost of capital, right? So ethically, you should know that your cost is 10%, you should be earning more than 10%. If you already forecasted you're going to earn less than 10%, less than the cost of the project, therefore you should ethically bound to reject the project, right? So the cost of capital reflects the entirety of the firm's financing activities. Right? So why they say entirety of the firm financing? Because your firm is not only funded by debt, you also have equity. Alright, so most of the cases you must have equity, right? You must have shareholders fund. Some companies they don't depend on any other funding. They just rely on their shareholders fund. Alright, so most of the companies they do take debt. They depend on getting loans. And some companies they do take preference shares. So so most of the companies have equity and debt, right? So combining, if I say for the project, if let's say it's worth 1 million, 500,000 I'm taking loan, another 500,000 I'm taking shareholders fund, right? So that you need to calculate 50% of cost of equity, 50% of cost of debt. Combine both, that is your cost of capital. And so that's why they say it's entirety of the firm's financing activities. So most firms attempt to maintain optimal mix of debt and equity financing. Alright, so we would have learned about, we would have had this prior knowledge on optimal capital structure, right? So what is the best combination of debt and equity? So companies will try to have the optimal combination. They don't have too much debt or too much equity, right? Okay, let's look at an example here. Firm currently have an investment opportunity. Alright, the cost of the project is 100,000. The life is 20 years, and the expected return from the project is 7%. Alright, so these are the forecasts. You already have the cost of the project, the duration of the project, and the return from the project is 7%. Right, and you can fund the 100,000 by using debt. Alright, so let's say you can take a loan worth 100,000 and your cost of debt is 6%. Alright, so the question is, would you go ahead with the project? Answer is yes, right? Because your cost is lesser than your return. Or in other words, your return is higher than your cost. Therefore, you will accept and go ahead with the project. Alright, imagine just a week later you found another investment opportunity. Again, it's 100,000, 20 years as well, and the expected return is much higher than the previous project, which is 12%. Right? But your cost, you can only finance it by equity. Previously was debt, now it's only by equity, and the equity funding is 14%. So if this is the case, would you still accept the project? No, right? Because your cost is higher than your return. Therefore, you will reject the project. Okay? What if instead the firm used a combination, right? If they use 50% debt and 50% equity, what would your decision be, right? 50% of the funding is through debt, another 50% through equity. Therefore, your overall cost of capital would be 10%. It's no longer 14%, right? Since you have combined. So if that's the case, with this average cost of financing, the first opportunity would have been rejected, right? Previously, the first opportunity give you only 7% return. And now, since you combine, your equity is 10%, so they would have rejected the first project. But the second project, you would accept it because your project return was 12% and now the cost is 10%. Your return is higher than your cost. Therefore, you would have accepted the second project. Alright? So if you still remember the first project, you only received 1% return. Second project, you would have rejected because your cost is higher. But now, since you combine your financing, now you accepted the second project and you get 2% return. Alright, so this is how you mix and find the optimal financing in order to do the project which gives you the highest return. Alright, so this shows your extract or portion of your balance sheet, statement of financial position. So when you're calculating cost of capital, we are only interested in the long-term capital, which is the long-term debt and also shareholders' equity. So class, remember, only long-term. It's not short-term debt, alright, or nothing. You don't take any assets because your asset is basically funded by liabilities and also equity. Alright, but remember it's long-term capital. So when you're doing any projects, alright, related to the sources of capital, you must take long-term debt and shareholders' equity. No one have to tell you shareholders' equity is long-term or short-term because equity is only long-term. Okay. Alright, let's look at the next cost of financing, which is cost of debt. And we always say pre-tax and after-tax cost of debt, right? Because there's a important factor that you're going to include in your cost of debt, which is tax. Alright. So typically the funds are raised through sale of corporate bonds. Alright. The chapter that we learned on bonds, right? Or one of the important financing is through debt, through bond policy. Alright. Net proceeds are the funds actually received by the firm from the sale of securities. So net proceeds means when you issue bond worth of 100 million, okay, from the 100 million you have to minus flotation costs. The remaining is what we call as net proceeds. Okay, we need to know what is flotation cost, right? Okay, what is flotation cost? Flotation cost quotation cost includes underwriting cost plus administrative cost. Alright, underwriting cost is compensation earned by investment bankers for selling securities. Alright, I would have mentioned to you earlier that when a company needs to issue bond, let's say Maxis Berhad wants to issue bonds, they can't issue directly to the market. They need to hire an investment bank to do behalf of them. Alright, so these banks, being a middle person, they will charge you underwriting costs to perform the entire bond issuance. So that is a cost. Alright, that is what we call as underwriting cost. And second is administrative costs. Alright, the legal, accounting, printing, all those costs for a bond issuance. Alright, it's quite substantial as well. Alright, so all those underwriting costs, administrative costs are flotation costs. Alright, so if you are issuing bond worth 100 million, alright, let's say 50 million is what is your flotation cost. So your net proceeds is 9. Sorry, what did I mention? If you issue 100 million worth of bonds, and if you have 50 million is flotation cost, your net proceeds is 95 million. Right? So that is called net proceeds. Alright, so before tax cost of debt is simply the rate of return the firm pay on your borrowing. Okay, your cost of debt for KD is, it's simple. For if you take a loan, alright, worth 100,000 and you have to pay 6% interest per annum, so that is your cost of debt. Alright, before tax cost of debt. And for bonds especially, we have different ways of calculating. One is yield to maturity. Alright, so yield to maturity is the cost of debt. Okay, if you're issuing bond and I'm asking you what is the cost of debt, then you calculate the yield to maturity, or if it's provided, that is your cost. Alright, so you can calculate yield to maturity, or you can use market quotations. Right? You can just look at the marketing index. Alright, so they would usually publish the similar yield to maturity. So you can use that, or you can use approximated as well. Right? Alright, so you can see here this kind of in a scenario here, a bond which has bond price was 960, the coupon was 90, years to maturity is 20, and the par value is 1000. If you can calculate the yield to maturity correctly, you would be getting 9.452%. Alright, so your yield to maturity is the cost of debt. Okay. Alright, moving on. Alright, so we have after tax. Alright, all this while we're talking about KD, cost of debt. Next we have KI, after tax cost of debt. Alright, so what is the difference between KI and KD? Yes, 1 minus T, and T stands for tax rate. Alright, so why there's a special thing here for cost of debt is because your debt, when you pay interest for your loan, right? Whether it's for coupons, or whether it's interest for the loans, the company's interest payment is tax deductible. Alright, it's a financing cost. The financing cost will reduce your profitability, right? Because reduce your tax, not profitability. Alright, when you pay higher interest, you end up paying lower tax because your interest is tax deductible. Therefore, we will incorporate the tax benefit when you calculate your cost of debt. Alright, that is why we have after tax cost of debt. Alright, So when you're going to calculate later on for your overall cost of capital, WACC, you will use this method because cost of debt minus the tax. Because the tax implication is beneficial for the company, it will reduce your overall cost. So you will include that effect in your calculation. Alright, so let's say Duchess Corporation, the company, um, alright, the country's tax rate is 40%, and if they're using your yield to maturity 9.452, what is the cost of debt after tax? It would be 9.4 times 1 minus tax rate. So your net cost of debt, alright, is 5.6%. After minusing tax benefit, your real cost actually for the company is only 5.6%. That is why I always mention your cost of debt is cheaper than cost of equity because of this specific tax benefit. Okay. Alright, next we have cost of common stock, common equity, ordinary shares, right? So we use KE, cost of equity, to calculate. Alright, so class, for this, we have two ways to calculate your cost of equity. So let's look one by one. First method is constant growth valuation model, Gordon growth model. Okay, you might be familiar with this, which is P naught. Alright, it's basically the share price equals to D1 dividend you expected to pay end of the year one. Alright, if the question did not give you D1, how do you calculate? If they didn't give you D1, they would have given you D0, D0. D0 means current year dividend. So how to calculate D1? D0 bracket 1 plus the growth rate. Alright, take note, D0 bracket 1 plus the growth rate is equals to D1. Okay, and then divide by cost of equity minus the dividend growth rate. So that is how you calculate your cost of equity. So if you just change the entire formula to calculate cost of equity, what will happen? D1 divided by P0 plus the growth rate. Okay, so this is the P0 is the share price, D1 as I mentioned end of the dividend paid end of the year one, KE or RE. Alright, so class, KE RE is the same thing. What's the difference? Just the terminology. So what's the difference in the terminology? Okay, so KE is used for the company's point of view. Alright, if let's say I need to pay 10% every year to the shareholders funding, alright, so that is the cost for the company. That is why KE, cost of equity. From the company's point of view, that's a cost, alright, because I need to pay for the shareholders. From the shareholders' point of view, I've invested in a company and I need a return of equity. Alright, it's called required return on equity. So that is what I call as the term. I put the sign as RE, the symbol RE. So required rate of return. From the shareholders' point of view, it's RE, while the company's point of view, it's a cost. So RE and KE, at the end of the day, you're finding the same thing. Okay? And then G is the constant rate of growth in dividend. So all this is needed for you to calculate cost of equity. Alright, so let's take an example here. Here the share price is $50 and you have to pay dividend $4 end of the year in 2013, and that is the differences, the price of dividend or the value of dividend paid for the last 6 years. So you are required to calculate what is the cost of equity. So how do you calculate the cost of equity? You need to calculate D1, you need to know the P naught, and you need to know the growth rate. Right? So as you can see, P naught for the share price is given, and D1 is also given for the only one left was the growth rate. So how do you calculate growth rate? Alright, so class, take note, your growth rate equals to the latest dividend alright, the latest dividend divided by the earliest dividend, the whole thing bracket 1 over power of 1 over 5, because here is 5 years, right, the growth rate. Alright, so your growth rate equals to interest dividend divided by earliest dividend. Alright, latest dividend divided by earliest dividend, power of power of 1 over n. Then the whole thing minus 1. Alright, so that is how you calculate the growth rate. You find the latest dividend, divide by the earliest dividend, alright, the past earliest or the past dividend, power of 1 over n. N is the number of growth. Alright, number of growth minus 1. Okay, if you look at the question, the growth rate is, how do you calculate the growth rate? The latest dividend is 3.8. Right, 3.8. The earliest or the past dividend is 2.97. The whole thing bracket 1 over n. N is the growth rate, growth of the return. It takes how many years? You have 6 years, right? But your n is not 6. You're looking at the growth 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Alright, so your growth is 5. So you put 3.8 divided by 2.97, and the power of 1 divided by 5. Alright. Alright. Then minus 1. Alright, so that would be giving you 5.05, right? So you should be getting 5.05 and approximately 5%. Therefore, that is what you used as your growth rate. Okay, so D14 divided by the share price plus the growth rate 0.05, right? 5% is 0.05 decimal points. Therefore, you should be getting 0.13, or your cost of capital is 13%. Right? So that is one way of calculating your cost of equity. And what about the other way? Other way using capital asset pricing model, which means risk-free rate plus beta market return minus risk-free rate. Alright, so you might be already familiar with this formula, CAPM formula. So this is how we calculate KE as well. So remember, there's not only one way, there's two ways to calculate the cost of equity. So let's do an example here, where the risk-free rate is 7%, the beta is 1.5, the market return is 11%. Right? This information is sufficient for you to calculate your cost of equity. Right? Risk-free rate plus beta times market return minus risk-free rate, you get 13%. Alright. So you are using both methods, two different methods to calculate cost of equity. Theoretically, both methods would give you same results. Theoretically, alright, because you're calculating the same thing, cost of equity. But practically, most of the time, you're getting different results. Right? In these two examples, both getting you 13%, but in reality, you will not get the same results. The reason is the criteria or the aspects or the features that you used in each formula is very different, right? One using dividend and also dividend growth rate, and the other formula using market return, all right, and beta. So two different aspects. So you might be most likely you'll be getting a different answer of cost equity. All right, but usually you find depends on the question. If they give you market risk-free rate, market return, beta, then you use CAPM formula. If they use the dividend growth rate, dividend, all right, or share price, then you use dividend growth model, the quote-unquote model to calculate. Okay, finally, right? Weighted average cost of capital is the method, is the formula you need to use to calculate the overall cost of capital for a company. Alright, so here it shows weightage of debt times the cost of debt, weightage of preference shares times cost of preference shares, weightage of equity times cost of equity. Right, so let me show you. So how do we calculate WACC? Okay. So cost of equity times market value of equity divided by market value of equity plus market value of debt plus market value of preference shares if the company has preference shares. Alright, then plus cost of debt times market value of debt divided by market value of equity plus market value of debt plus market value of preference shares. Alright, plus you have to take note, for cost of debt you have to minus the tax. Okay, and of course if the question got preference shares, you would do the same thing, but here you would have included cost of preference shares and market value of preference shares. Alright, so this is how you calculate your overall WACC, cost of equity times the proportion of the equity. Our overall financing, how much is funded by equity. Okay, same goes to cost of debt. The only difference is minus tax. How much is funded by debt and how much is funded by preference shares. If let's say 50% is funded by equity, 30% through debt, 20% is preference shares. Alright, 50, 30, 20. That is the weightage. Alright, that is what is stated in the notes as WE, WP, WD is the weightage for the probability of the market value of the funding. And in other words, this weightage is what we call as capital structure. Alright, when we learn about optimal capital structure, alright, this is also known as the capital structure. The weightage or the probabilities of the market value of the financing is what is known as capital structure. Alright, so the next, for the computational convenience, what I would suggest is convert the weightage into decimal forms. Okay, if you get 50%, you change, when you calculate WACC, you change 50% to 0.5. If you get 33%, change to 0.33. Okay, and the weights must be non-negative. Your weightage cannot be negative, and when you add up all together, as I mentioned just now, right, 50%, 30%, 20%, so 0.5, then you have 0.3, 0.2. When you add up all together, you should be getting 100%. So that is one way of testing. Okay. Alright, let's do a example. Alright, in this question you have for Duchess Corporation, you have cost of debt 5.6, cost of preference shares 10.6, and cost of equity is 13%. So if all the costs, and the question also given what is the proportion of the weightage of each financing, which is 40% debt, 10% preference shares, and 50% equity. So this is the portion, this is the capital structure of the Duchess Corporation. 50% funded by equity, 40% by debt, preference by 10%. So how do we calculate your WACC? Weightage times the respective cost, you get the weighted cost. 40% times 5.6, you get 2.2. 0. That's why just now when I say change the weightage, just now was 40%, 10%, 50%, right? Convert to decimals, because when you have this as a percentage and your cost as a percentage, then sometimes you might get error here when you calculate, right? So that is why, for the convenience, convert this to decimal, the weightage. Cost, keep it as percentage. Cost, keep it as percentage. So this times this, you get a weighted cost for all of it. Debt, preference shares, common equity, combine all together, Therefore, your overall cost for the company is 9.8%. All right. So if let's say you planning to do a new project and your funding is based on this model, right? 40% debt, 10% preference shares, 50% equity. So this is how what is your capital structure. This is how you fund a project. Then you know your overall cost for the project is 9.8%. Therefore, the return from the project must be higher than 9.8%. If it's anything less than 9.8%, that means the project is loss making. Therefore, you reject the project. Right? Alright, so another example, Chuck Solis Enterprise. Alright, here in this example is you again we're going to use the same method of WECC, but here the reason behind it is different, which is for Chuck Solis Enterprise they have three different loans with three different annual interest rate, right? But he found a lender who can give the company 80,000. Okay, what is 80,000? If you all the three loans compiled together, you get 80,000. And Chuck, right? The company thinking instead of paying three different annual interest rate, one is 9.6, 10.6, 7.4. All right, I rather just take the 80,000 from the fourth lender and take the money, settle all the other three loans, and I just pay only one interest rate, 9.2%. Do you think it's the right thing to do or not the right thing to do? So what we have to do, just like what we did in the WECC, you cannot simply add all this together, divide by 3, right? Because you need to find the proportion of it. So you need to calculate the proportion, 10 times the respective interest rate, add all this together, then you know how much you're really paying. So 26,000 divided by 80,000 times 9.6. So this 0. About 32.5%, and this one your weightage is 11.25%. The second loan, third loan is 56%, right? The proportion. So proportion times with the respective interest rate add up all together, you're getting 8.47% or 8.5%. So class, do you agree of taking 80,000 from the fourth lender and settle all the other three loans and paying the 9.2%, or you just stick with the initial um, what do you call it, initial loans by not changing any of the uh, method of financing? Which one do you think better? Right? It's actually keeping all three loans is cheaper compared to taking the one lump sum 80,000 and paying 9.2%. Right? So basically using the same method of probability and finding the overall cost. Alright, so the overall cost is 8.5%. Alright, so class, these are to review your learning goals, which is whatever you learned earlier, we are just summarizing here. Right? So what is the concept of source of capital, and how do you think your cost of long-term debt explained after tax cost of debt, and these are the explanation or further explanation of the concept that we have learned, right? So with that, I will complete the chapter on cost of capital.